I should be complimented by your promptness in coming to this room tonight, where I'm not aware of the fact that this is the only air-conditioned space in all of Westchester County, at least, that you've been able to discover. And I trust you were not brought here by that title of mine, Distinguished Professor of Political Economy. Some of you are teachers. You should be aware of the fact that that is the kind of thing that they hand out at small colleges to senior faculty members instead of cash. Now, you may wonder, we see, you have now listened to Leonard Reed, you have listened to Ed Opitz, to Hans Sennholz, to Bob Anderson, to these many distinguished people. It should be obvious that nothing remains to be said, and I am honored that I have been brought here at great expense to say it tonight. As a matter of fact, I really am not necessary here. You see, my assignment here in these fee seminars is to deal with the trivia, the questions that do not really need to be answered. So you can say, well, there's a trick here of some kind. Rogge doesn't really mean that, but I really do. Let us assume for the moment that Leonard Reed is right in that basic principle of his. You see, he is human and hence fallible, and he could be wrong.
I resent that.
He's also sensitive, as you can gather. He could be wrong. But let us assume for the moment that he is right, that each of us is indeed endowed from the beginning with the right to do anything that's peaceful. Now, if that principle is correct, then any actions based on that principle are bound to work, and actions that are not based upon that principle, that are in defiance of that principle, will not work. Now, what are the questions that an economist deals with? That's what I am. You have in front of you a card-carrying, licensed, 100% certified economist. What kinds of questions can I deal with? The questions I can deal with are the questions of the workability of the idea of freedom. And what I'm saying is that if Reed is right in this principle of his, of that each of us is indeed endowed with this right to do anything that's peaceful, and to do it singly or in pairs or in groups as large as, say, the Mormon Church or General Motors, so long as it's peaceful, then that really is all you need to know to answer all of the questions on economic policy that now confront this or any other society. That's all you really need to know. For example, what about a minimum wage law? You see, a minimum wage law is a coercive intrusion by society in what would otherwise be a voluntary agreement between two consenting parties. And for society to intrude in that is then morally wrong. It is a violation of the freedom of each of the participating parties. It is not surprising then, as I think, that it doesn't work. That is, if I were to have picked this as my topic tonight, I think I could give you a significant amount of evidence that would tend to show that what the minimum wage law does is to hurt precisely those it is designed to help. That it doesn't work, in other words. It is in defiance of principle, and therefore it doesn't work. You see, unless this world is absurd, then that which is right in principle is going to work, and that which is wrong in principle isn't going to work. Now, the world may be absurd. We can never be absolutely certain of that. It may be a tale told by an idiot. We don't really know. But if it isn't a tale told by an idiot, then if it is right in principle, it's going to work. And if it's wrong in principle, it isn't going to work. Now, what does Ben Rogge deal with then? He deals with these questions of workability. Let me take another question. What about the Social Security system? Do you need a Ben Rogge kind of an analysis of the current financial catastrophe represented by the Social Security system to know that it's wrong? Not if you accept Leonard Reed's principle, because Leonard Reed's principle would condemn it offhand. It would say, this is a coercive intrusion in the life of the individual human being, telling him or her how certain assets are to be used and for what purposes, and hence it's wrong in principle. In other words, if this principle is correct, then you don't need Rogge. If this principle is wrong, you're wasting your time here anyway. That's right. If Reed is right, you don't need me. If Reed is wrong, you ought to get out of here anyway. Now, Opitz might still have some value. He's kind of an assistant Moses. He helps him find the right tablets up there on the mountain or what have you, but Sennholz and Anderson and I are a waste of time because we are economists. Well, now, let me try to resurrect myself. Let me try to figure out something that I might be able to do for you. You see, even though I think we understand that if something is right in principle, it's going to work, still, most of us need some reassurance from time to time. I can imagine that as Columbus was coming across the Atlantic, that every now and then there would be rumblings down below. You see, and there must have been somebody on the crew of Columbus who served the Rogge kind of role. You see, and somebody would come up from down below and say, now, you know, there's a man down there who says that day after tomorrow we're going to come to the end of the universe and go right off, just like that. Now run through it one more time. You know, how come we can go west? I mean, go east, get to the east by going west. Well, in effect, this is what Ben Rogge does. This is what Bob Anderson does. This is what Gary North does in part. This is what Hans Sennholz does. We talk about workability. We talk about the workability of freedom. And you see, it is a frightening prospect. See, once we human beings are so constructed that once we grow accustomed to a familiar way of doing things, even if they may be painful to us at times, even if they may end up actually restricting us and harming us, once we really grow accustomed to them, it becomes difficult at times for us to break free of them. Do you realize if that madman Reed had his way, if he pushed that little button of his, that as of tomorrow morning, there would be no minimum wage laws. As of tomorrow morning, the Social Security system would have disappeared. Well, they might pay you back your assets or what have you, but it would have disappeared. As of tomorrow morning, the public schools in which many of you teach would have disappeared. The University of Indiana would have disappeared. The local library would have disappeared. The Food and Drug Administration would have disappeared. The Tennessee Valley Authority would have disappeared. The Antitrust Division of the Attorney General's office would have disappeared. See, all of these things would have been swept away by the simple application of the Leonard Reed principle. If it is a violation of freedom, you don't do it. It's wrong. You see, this takes a lot of getting used to. And most people, when they first confront this kind, and they first look at directly in the eyeball, it's pretty darn disconcerting. And they say, as I'm certain many of you have been saying this week, do you really mean that you intend to get rid of the antitrust laws? Do you really mean, that's inconceivable. If it weren't for the government, instead of freedom, what we would have around here, we'd all be run by General Motors, or U.S. Steel, or Standard Oil, or somebody like that, IBM. Isn't it absolutely necessary that we have the government, or somebody here standing between us and these private power groups? Now that's my topic tonight. I'm going to come back to it in a moment. You see, there are many other questions that I'm certain have come to your mind. You see, if Reed punched his button tomorrow morning, there would be no Federal Reserve System. There would be no governmental agency charged with administering a money system. Think about that. It would be whatever money, whatever people had decided upon as a money system. Now, as a matter of fact, that's what it amounts to anyway. Finally, if the people do not accept it, it isn't money. If the dogs won't eat it, it ain't dog food. You know? And if people don't accept it, that's right. And if people don't accept it, it isn't money. Now you see, the ordinary hypothesis is that a capitalist economy tends to be given to fluctuations from boom to bust unless some agency or agencies of government come in to stabilize it. Now I trust and I would assume that what Hans Sennholz and others have been saying to you in this week is precisely the opposite. That government is itself the greatest cause of instability in the economy. And that I would argue that turning the money system over to the government is like turning the liquor store over to an alcoholic. You know? It is the agency that brings on the problem rather than the source of the solution. You see, one after another of these questions keep coming up. And I had them. You see, I was not born into this world possessed of the wisdom and the philosophy of Leonard Reed. It took me a long time, and you know, God knows, I certain I am imperfect yet. But I had each of these misconceptions, who knows whether they're misconceptions or not. We could be wrong. But I had these same disconcerting thoughts from the very beginning that I'm certain many of you have. Do you really mean that you would get rid of the antitrust laws, of the Federal Trade Commission, of the Food and Drug Administration? You know, what would happen to us? Well, that's what I want to talk about. What would happen to us if we really tried freedom? And what I'm going to argue is that freedom does, in fact, work. And the answer that I'm giving you here is the answer of an economist. I'm not talking about whether freedom is right or wrong in principle now. I'm just asking the question, does it work? Because that's what I'm hired to do. I am an economist. I'm a technician. I'm a mechanic. See, Reed and Opitz keep all the goodies for themselves, you know, the philosophy and that kind of thing. They call in us mechanics, and I am a mechanic here. And the question, my challenge tonight is this one. If we really had a Leonard Reed kind of economy, instead of being free, would we not rather be the pawns, the cat's paws of General Motors, of Madison Avenue, of U.S. Steel, or some combination of all of these? Wouldn't we be crushed under these various private power groupings that would inevitably arise? That's the question we have in front of us. We can take it in a very specific sense. Is General Motors selling its cars in a competitive or a relatively non-competitive market? You know, this is a very practical kind of question. We have in front of there are right now in the drawers of the Attorney General's, the Antitrust Division of the Attorney General's office, various proposals for breaking up General Motors. There is a long ongoing suit right now against IBM that has been going for some time and is going to keep on going for a long, long time. Most of us in this room will never live to see it ended. Maybe a permanent case against IBM, who knows, to the great advantage of the lawyers. Now, who's right and who's wrong? Is General Motors selling in a competitive market or isn't it? Well, you see, everything depends upon how you define competition, how you define monopoly, and that's where I want to begin. See, why can't the economists tell you whether the automobile market in America is competitive or not? Simple question, isn't it? Straightforward, factual. Why can't we just give you a straightforward answer? Well, I'm going to be arguing with you, arguing that I think the primary problem that we still confront is that of definition. What is competition? What is monopoly? On definitional problems, I like the story of the three baseball officials, the three umpires. And one of them says, I calls them as I sees them. And the second one says, I calls them as they are. And the third one, and my hero, says, they ain't nothing till I calls them. Well, that's about where we're going to end up here. Or to give you another example of the ambiguity and of the problems that it creates. In the Rogge backyard for many years we had a birdhouse. And every spring the martins and the starlings would have a fight over that birdhouse. And one Saturday morning my neighbor and I were sitting out there in the sunshine watching the fight. And he said, Rogge, the martins are going to win this year. They outnumber the starlings 3-1. I said, Cantrell, you fool, it's just the other way around. So we agreed to count. And when we got through, he said, yes, it's the martins 3-1, and I said, it's the starlings 3-1. And I said, now, Cantrell, I have a confession to make. I am not certain I know the difference between a martin and a starling. Sitting her on the wing. And he said, Rogge, I'm glad you said it first, because I don't either. I am convinced we have a problem very similar to that in the economic world. By the way, I used this first year or two ago, and some time after the first time I used, within a week or two, I started getting a bunch of clippings from Missouri, where it seemed the governor of Missouri had sent the workmen out to shoot the starlings that were nesting around the governor's mansion. As you know, starlings are a mess, and martins are a magnificent bird to have in the backyard. They really are. And he had sent the workmen out to kill off the starlings, and they slaughtered 3,000 purple martins. You see? And the moral of the story in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch was, if you can't tell the difference between a martin and a starling, don't shoot. You see, I think it's a pity that motto isn't followed in economic life, because I think many of the martins of the American economy are being shot at now on the mistaken assumption that they are, in fact, starlings. You see, everything depends upon which bird guide you take. out into the world, doesn't it? And so what I'm going to do is give you your choice of 3 bird guides. Not just 1, but 3. The first one I will call the standard orthodox textbook majority opinion bird guide. The second one I'm going to call the Galbraithian bird guide after John Kenneth Galbraith. And the third one is the truth. I'm going to call it the Schumpeter-Rogge bird guide. The Schumpeter-Rogge bird guide. I'll tell you more about Joseph Schumpeter in a moment. Some of you may have heard about him. He's dead. If Schumpeter were alive and here, I doubt if he would call it the Schumpeter-Rogge bird guide. But he is dead and I'm here, and it's the Schumpeter-Rogge bird guide. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But now, let's begin with the standard orthodox textbook majority opinion bird guide to competition and monopoly in America, on the basis of which the hypothesis is generally put forward that there is a tendency in the marketplace for markets to become less and less, many of the markets to become less and less competitive, and only strong action by government can prevent that from happening, or can correct it if it has already taken place, or can substitute regulation or government ownership and operation for it if it has gone too far. That is the standard orthodox approach, and it is reflected in some ways in the antitrust laws of this country. It is it is reflected, for example, in an extreme form in a proposal that's still floating around the Senate that was first put up by the late Senator Philip Hart of Michigan, in which proposal it was, in which proposed legislation, Senator Hart proposed that a firm be declared guilty per se of violating the antitrust laws if, 1, profit after taxes were in excess of 15% for a period of 5 consecutive years. That is, if it were successful.
You say this thing is floating around?
It's still there, still before the Senate. In one form, I don't know that it is on the floor right now, but it's still being put together. It's being put together with pieces of a nadir proposal, by the way, that's somewhat broader than that for the national incorporation, the federal incorporation of all major corporations in America. By the way, or any 4 or fewer firms in a given marketplace sell 50% or more of the total output. Now, you'd be amazed. That would take care of just about, I would guess, 50 to 60% of the output produced in America today in dollar value. And these firms are going to be guilty per se of violating the antitrust laws under the Hart proposal. Now, how do you come to now, not all people who propose this, who have this general point of view, would propose a solution that extreme. I have called this the standard orthodox textbook majority opinion proposal because it is the one that you would find in most of the textbooks on economics. It would be the one that most of you who have taken formal courses in economics would have studied. This is what many of you had to learn to put down on your examination papers. And it is, I would guess, the majority opinion among the people who give thought to these questions in America today. Now, where does it begin? It begins in this way. The textbook writer says to himself, let me create a definition of competition so unambiguous, so absolutely clear, that there could never be any mistake about it. And we will call that ideal or pure or perfect competition. Pure competition, for example. Now, what are the requirements for pure competition to exist? As many of you know, because you had to put it down on your exam papers, size. The first requirement, and the one that really on which attention is focused, is the size of the firm. And the requirement for competition to exist is that the firm be so small that by its own actions it can have no noticeable influence on the market. Like one wheat farmer, which is true for one wheat farmer. You see, but for most of the markets of this country, no. But in other words, the focus is upon size, and they say for it to be perfect or pure or ideal competition, the firm must be at a little atom here in a great big sea of firms. Now, secondly, homogeneity of product. The product of one firm must be identical with that of another, and is to be seen as such by the consumer. Differentiation is suspect. This is being reflected, by the way, in legislation now in front of many of the legislatures of this nation, the state legislatures, in terms of the requirement on generic drugs. The requirement that the doctor and the druggist must be able to substitute and use generic designations of pharmaceuticals rather than brand names. There is a suspicion implied here of differentiation, of calling it Eli Lilly or Squibb or Park Davis or what have you. The third requirement is ease of entry and exit. Anybody can get in, anybody can get out. Number 4, there must be no collusion, no getting together, no cartels, no conspiracies. And finally, full knowledge. Every participant in the market must have full knowledge of all of the relevant information in the marketplace. And because this includes guesses about the future, it would require for it to really be pure, for this to be pure, full knowledge of the future as well. Now make that your definition of a competitor bird. Go out in the real world, how many of them do you find? None. None. By the very nature of the human being, it's never going to be that way. Knowledge alone. Every decision you and I make in our lives is based on less than full knowledge. Every single one is based on less than full knowledge. Well, again, I don't want to some of you may want to get into questions of revealed truth, but what I'm saying, in terms of the marketplace, or the other kinds of decisions we make in life, every decision we make, inevitably because we are human and not divine, is based on less than full knowledge. For now we see as through a glass darkly, you see. That is the human condition. Well, in any case, this is the pure competitor bird. Now, over at this end we have the pure monopoly bird. Now, the pure monopoly bird can be recognized by the fact that there is only one firm in the industry, no entry, and here's the real kicker, no real substitutes. Because if there are substitutes, then it really isn't a monopoly. Now, for how many things in this world are there no real substitutes?
Me.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm not going to press that any further in that. But my students, I can see it's Friday night. The natives are restless here. My students, you know, they say, the telephone. Telephone. I say, do you realize that there are whole generations of human beings who have lived out their lives without a telephone? They just can't imagine it, you know. There are other ways of communicating. I said, you don't even have to call collect. There are people who pay for phone calls. Students never do. Rogge children never do. But I grew up in a house with no telephone, you know. When I wanted to call, I went over to my Aunt Mary's, and you know what her number was? 3. You know, there are other ways of communicating, but in any case, you make this your definition of pure monopoly and go out into the real world. How many monopoly birds do you find? Almost none. Well, they say, all right, we'll fill in the middle. Going this way, here is a kind of market in which, after the Greek, the oli here, the oligarchy and so on, we have a few firms seem to be controlling the market with difficult entry. And that is called oligopoly. And it doesn't even sound good. Oligopoly, the rule of the few.
What is the second?
Oligopoly. Oh, difficult entry. I've had a lot of complaints about my writing over the years. Now, as a matter of fact, you look around, this is what is now being called, in the language of today, if you want to know, shared monopoly. Shared monopoly. The rule of the few. If you look at most of the many of the markets in America, they seem to be examples of oligopoly, as in automobile production, big steel, so on. You know. Well, they fill in between oligopoly and pure competition with one other category called monopolistic competition, or imperfect competition. And this is the kind of a situation in which you have many firms, easy entry, but What makes it not fully competitive is that you have differentiated products rather than homogeneous. Differentiated products. For example, beer. For example, fast food. Fast food services, you know. Is it easy to get in and out of the hamburger business? Sure, these days. And you know, I think they all buy their hamburger at the same plastics plant. But there is some difference between McDonald's and Burger King and Burger Chef, you know, and all of it, you know, so on. But that's monopolistic competition. Now that's the bird guide. That is the standard orthodox bird guide to the real world. If you take that out into the real world, you're not going to find any cases of that. You aren't going to find many cases of this. You're going to come back, and the best you can report is that the real world is filled with examples of oligopoly and monopolistic competition. Now, the implication of this for policy purposes runs as follows. Obviously, this is an ideal, and we can't attain it, but we ought to be pushing back in that direction all the time. If firms are starting to get too big, what do? We deny them the right to acquire. We deny them the right to merge. If they are already too big, we tell them, we break them up, as we did Standard Oil long ago. You see, the public policy should be pushing back in that direction, because as you move away from this, you become less and less efficient, less and less equitable, more and more under the control of the few, of the big. Now that is the standard orthodox majority opinion on competition and monopoly in America. Normally, as a matter of fact, I would have been encouraging you to come in as we go along here. This is going down for posterity tonight on that camera back there, and they have asked me to go on through with the development. But let me just stop very briefly to see if you have not questions of argument about this, of rightness or wrongness, but just simply questions of clarification. You understand what this point of view tends to imply. Okay? All right, let's go on to John Kenneth Galbraith. Did many of you see the 10-part series by Galbraith on public broadcasting, The Age of Uncertainty? Most of you, I trust, know about him. If you're not reading his work, you really must, because he is the single most influential social scientist now at work in America, I think. If you will pardon the language, I have described him from time to time as an intelligent, articulate, literate, persuasive, arrogant, wrong-headed son of a bitch. And he is all of that. If he were here, he would argue only about the wrong-headed part of it. As Leonard Reed says, he says, Rogge, people like Galbraith who think they know everything are a very real trial to those of us who really do. No, he's an enormously effective man, and I think tragically wrong. But John Kenneth Galbraith, in his various books, including The New Industrial State in its 2 or 3 versions, in The Affluent Society and in other writings of his, and in recent pronouncements, has come up with a second guide to the real world and the implications for it. He begins in what I think is a most sensible way. I like much of what he says in his beginning, in the way he starts out here. He says, it's amusing, is it not, that if you go into the main offices of one of the major corporations in this country, in America, you're likely to find 2 groups of people there from government. One will be a group of bright young lawyers getting ready to bring an antitrust case against the firm. The other people from government will be the purchasing agents from all the major departments of government. Why are they there? Because that's where it is. That's where the action is. That's where you get the production, the efficiency. That's where you get it done. He said it is foolish and idle to talk about atomistic competition in the automotive industry. 200,000 producers of identical automobiles. See, it's just ridiculous. Modern technology will not permit that kind of luxury, if such it be. Now, does that mean that you let these firms alone? What he's saying then is, don't break them up. Does that mean you let them alone? No, not at all. The question is, who controls these firms? Galbraith's answer is, if you look at the first instance, each firm is controlled by what he calls the technostructure within that firm. And the technostructure is made up of those who know how to design a car, how to engineer a car, how to accumulate the capital for the making of a car, how to collect the personnel for the making of a car, how to administer the making of a car, how to sell a car, how to make money out of it, you know. In other words, the people who know how to get things done. This is the technostructure. Now, it's made up of the people who know how to get things done, and the question is, who controls the technostructure? The old assumption was that the consumer controlled the business firm, and hence the technostructure. This, according to Galbraith, is pure myth. He says the modern firm has to make decisions with a 15 to 20 or 25-year time projection. And that firm cannot wait upon the whim and caprice of the consumer to validate that decision. The firm has no choice but to control the consumer. In other words, the consumer, rather than controlling the firm, is controlled by the firm and its allies on Madison Avenue. The consumer then is manipulated by, is the pawn of, the cat's paw of the firm. Secondly, is the technostructure controlled by the stockholders? No, says Galbraith. The typical, and I think that's right. The typical stockholder has really very little idea what's going on in the boardroom or in the management offices. Is the technostructure controlled by the regulatory agencies that may exist in the industry? Galbraith says in most cases no. He says, as a matter of fact, after a few years, the regulators come to be the pawns of the regulated, who then use the regulations to control entry, to restrict competition, and to exploit the consumer. And I agree with him. I agree with him. For example, the Interstate Commerce Commission, set up to protect us in transportation, right? Well, here's a statement by one of the great distinguished transportation economists of America, a man by the name of David Maxwell, who said the Interstate Commerce Commission is a system of laws and rules and an administration of those laws and rules in which the overweening goal is to maintain at as high a level as possible the cost of moving the country's goods. The Interstate Commerce Commission has done a truly remarkable job of battling technology head-on and to a considerable extent winning. There are estimates that, as a matter of fact, the Interstate Commerce Commission costs us from $4 to $8 billion a year in extra transport costs. Most of those big dudes you see out on the highway are, well, something at times approaching half are empty. Because they must be? No. Because of all the crazy rules that control that. In the unregulated trucking industry for agricultural products, the empty ride is only about 15%. In the regulated, it's 35 to 40. And you pay for that. You see an extra transport cost. In other words, Galbraith argues that the regulating agencies tend often to come under the control of the firms or the groups being regulated who use it for their own purposes, and I would agree. Including, I would argue from time to time, doctors, lawyers, teachers. Many groups use the regulatory agency as a way of controlling entry. Well, who then does control the technostructure? If the consumers do not, the stockholders do not, the regulating agencies do not, who controls the technostructure? Says Galbraith, no one. Each technostructure is a self-perpetuating dynasty, responsible only to itself. What's wrong with that? Are these evil men? No. Are they competent men and women? Yes. Well, what's wrong then? What is wrong is not that they aren't good at doing what they do. What is wrong is that they so often do the wrong thing. That is, they produce the wrong product. They produce the wrong service. They produce it in the wrong style, with the wrong adornment or what have you, with the wrong degree of safety. And why do they do that? It is not, you see, that they don't do what the consumer may want. According to Galbraith, it is in fact because many times they do what the consumer wants, rather than doing what is right. That is, rather than doing what the consumer would want if he were smart enough to know what was good for him. So what's the answer? The answer is to put the technostructure under the control of those who do know. Who are they? Galbraith and people like him. That's right, just literally. See, the problem is not that the consumer doesn't get what he wants. The problem is the consumer doesn't know enough to know what is best for him and for society. And that decision can't be left to the individual anymore, or to the technostructure. He says, look, you're complaining because I want to dictate decisions. He says, as a matter of fact, these decisions are being dictated right now by the technostructure. I'm just going to turn it over to those who really know. And who are the ones who really know? People like Galbraith. He identifies particularly those of us in the academic world, in the academy. We are the ones who spend our lives contemplating the social good. We are specialists in the social good. Therefore, it should be turned over to us for management. Now, do you see why it is so popular with the word people around the world? He's saying to that assistant professor at Wayne State University in Detroit, when my scheme comes into being, the next meeting of the General Motors Board of Directors, you're going to be down there as a member of that board with the power of mandate and veto. And when the board says we're going to produce more of those big dudes now because people don't like those little cars, you're going to say to them, no, no, no. That isn't the way it's going to be, because that's contrary to the long-run best interests of the Americans of the world, the American society. That is literally Galbraith's point of view. Now, as soon as he told me who was going to run affairs, I knew it wouldn't work. Many of you are teachers, you know, and that's what I am. And if there's anything that we have difficulty doing, it's running anything. In part because we have difficulty agreeing, you know. When I was academic dean at Wabash, 3 of the young assistant professors came in and they said, Dean Rogge, the curriculum of this college is an abomination. It's an anachronism. It's an embarrassment. We've got to have a new curriculum. I said, why don't the 3 of you go out and prepare a proposal for a new curriculum and bring it back for study? I never saw them again. They could never agree. See? We intellectuals, you know, I think we have an important role to play in life, but the one thing we have difficulty doing is running anything, because we have so much difficulty agreeing. And we don't really understand power anyway, in most cases. But anyway, this is what Galbraith is going to do. He's going to have the major decisions of economic life turned over to the philosopher kings. Now, exactly how they would come into being, how this would be done, he's much less certain. But many of the proposals that are now in front, that are now being discussed for the federal incorporation of major concerns, for the putting of public members on the boards of directors, for putting people from the community where the plants are located on the boards of directors. All of these are movements in the direction of taking decision-making away from the ownership interest of the corporation and putting decision-making in the hands of some ambiguous group of those who represent the public interest. And that's where Galbraith would have us head. Okay? Now, remember, he would say, don't, the textbook would say, break them up. Galbraith would say, don't break them up, turn them over to me, and people like me to run. Now, what would Schumpeter and Rogge say? Well, first of all, who is Joseph Schumpeter? Who was he? He was an Austrian. You've heard a lot about Austrians this week, I would guess. And he was a colleague, that is, he was of the same age group as Mises, a little older than Hayek. Born and raised in Vienna. Brilliant career there as in the academy and in banking and in the government. And in the early 1930s came to Harvard as a professor and taught at Harvard until his death in 1950. And in 1942 he published a book called Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy that I think is one of the great prophetic books of this century. But that isn't what I'm going to go into, that prophecy. That's another lecture of mine. What I want to go into tonight is his approach to this question. What kind of a bird guide would he suggest to us for telling a competitor bird from a monopoly bird? And everything relates to how the best way of seeing it is to see how various people would interpret these data. Here, the year 1951 in this particular market, Company A was selling 32% of the output, Company B 22%, Company C 19%, Company D 17%, all others 10%. Now, I'll tell you, this is a product grouping in the pharmaceutical market. If you really want to know, these are diuretics. This is the diuretic product grouping. In 1951, the top 4 firms are selling 90% of the output. Under the Phil Hart proposal, they would all be, each would be guilty per se of violating the antitrust laws, right? Now, take these data to Schumpeter and say to Schumpeter, look at these numbers here and tell me whether you think that's a competitive market. And Schumpeter's response would be, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. If you really believe that you can tell whether there is competition by looking at those numbers right there, you really don't understand what the real world is all about. He said, the first thing I want, and he said, let me illustrate it. What I really want to know is what happened next year. What happened next year? All right, what happened next year? 1952. Company A, our head oligopolist here, is down to only 9%. Company B about the same. Company C has come clear up to 37%. Company D about the same. You can say, well, yeah, but it's the same old crowd of 4 playing the game here. And Schumpeter would say, what happened in 53? He said, yeah, about the same. He would say, what happened in 54? All right, let's go to 54. In 1954, Company A has disappeared into the all others. Company B is down to 10%. Company C has 16%. Company D has 5%. The all others have 10%. And a totally new bird, Company F, has 59% of the market. Schumpeter would say, now you're beginning to get the idea. Now you're beginning to get the idea. Now, as a matter of fact, F expands its share of the market, and in 1957 is selling 2/3 of all the diuretic products sold in America. And you can bet making a pretty penny. If you were to examine just simply production costs and selling prices, you would say this firm is exploiting suffering humanity. Schumpeter, though, would ask what happened next year. Remember, in 57, Company F was selling 2/3 of all the diuretic products sold in America. In 1958, A, B, C, and D, all of these oligopolists who are able to manipulate consumers and control the market and have absolute power over our lives, have all disappeared into the all others. The all others have 8%. Company F, our monopolist, has 14%, and another totally new bird, Company H, has 78% of the market. Now that's competition. Some people say, now you got the idea. He says, what you've really got to understand is the very nature of the capitalist process is this never-ending game of leapfrog, of what he called creative destruction. One person's creativity got that person or group out ahead. Somebody else's creativity destroys that position and is in turn destroyed by somebody else's creativity. And you have this never-ending game of somebody gets out ahead, and when they get out ahead, they make a lot of money. Henry Ford at one time in the early 20s is reported to have made for 35 or 38 days in a row $1 million a day after taxes for himself. Boom. You can say, oh, nobody can be worth that. Schumpeter would say, nonsense. That is what set in motion. Everybody who had a garage big enough to try to build a car in was trying to build a car. You know? And, by the way, and most of them failed. This was the modern Edsel, right there. You see, somebody else tries, and pretty soon they get out ahead. And at any moment of time, it's true, like a horse race, any moment of time, you stop, take a stop-action photograph, you discover to your horror that somebody is out ahead. And that is the error, the sin of the textbook approach. It does not look at the long perspective here, the panorama of incessant leapfrogging, of creative destruction, which can go on, as a matter of fact, even though there is only one firm. That is, the market will act, even if there is only one firm out there, according to Schumpeter, it will still have to act as if it faced immediate rivals. Why? Because if it doesn't, it soon will. It will hear, you see, I had a friend in Crawfordsville who used to try to explain this to me before I really understood the Schumpeter model, and he'd never heard of Schumpeter in his life, but he was a businessman. He kept saying to me, Rogge, what I want in my little wire business is a sweet little monopoly, meaning he wanted to be there first. And he said, for example, right after World War II, I was the only plant in the country making metal shoehorns. I said, what happened? He said, some SOB came out with a plastic shoehorn. See? This is the way it goes. What about the people who were making vacuum tubes? You know, there are only two firms, and my, were they making money. Then the transistor came along and wiped them out, virtually. The people, the slide rule people. And what has happened to the slide rule people? You see, this is this never-ending game of leapfrog. You see? And it, as he said, no, but doesn't it cost the consumer a lot of money? You can say, look, how about that $1 million a day, though? And Schumpeter would say, yeah, but how about all of this? He said, if you deduct, he said, this is an enormously risky business. You deduct these losses from those wins, and it may actually be a zero-sum game, or a less than zero-sum game. The losses may more than compensate for the gains. Well, now, why would people participate in a less than zero-sum game? Well, of course, if people weren't willing to do that, there would never be any organized gambling, would there? Because when you go to the racetrack or to the casino, the house takes a cut, and it's always a less than zero-sum game. Anyway, I've got a lecture on gambling I want to give sometime. What I find interesting is that gambling is so degrading, so disgusting an activity in this country that only churches and governments are permitted to sponsor it. You know? My wife ran the Episcopal bridge tournament in Crawfordsville, my first wife, for many years, and she, the payout rate on that bridge tournament was so low the mafia would have been embarrassed by it. But anyway, this is the great gamble of life, right here. This is an enormous gamble these people take. If you want to know where this is beautifully illustrated, read a book that wasn't written to prove this, but I think does. It's Alvin Toffler's book, Future Shock. That's what Future Shock is all about, is exactly this. And his examples almost all come right out of the economic world, right off the shelves of the supermarket, where he talks about how most of the products that are on the supermarket shelves at a given moment of time did not even exist 10 years before. And he talks about the fact that in any given year, of the products that finally get to the supermarket shelves, only 1 in 5 meets its sales target. Where is this capacity to manipulate the consumer? To make us buy whatever they want us to buy, whatever they've decided to produce. What went wrong? You see, if Galbraith would simply look out the window, he'd know it wasn't true. You just look out the window and see this. Now you can say, yes, but General Motors doesn't disappear. Of course not. Why not? Because they learned long ago, if you go into the market with only one product, suppose Company A had only one product line, and that was in the diuretics, it would have been bankrupt in 1954. Why do firms diversify? Because they hear these footsteps behind them all the time. And they know that you've got to have some way here of surviving as a firm, so most of them diversify. But you see, this is what Schumpeter says. Now, let me talk about that question, though. They say, but can't they manipulate, can't they really control the consumer? Aren't we, well, first of all, I would argue that data do not back up that idea at all. The data shows this enormous game of leapfrog going on madly out there in the real world, including General Motors. People say, who could leapfrog over General Motors or IBM? Well, IBM, some of you may have been following what's been happening in the computer business, and you have this magnificent example of the, for example, Amdahl. that small firm that has come into the computer business. Small computer firm challenges big IBM. Amdahl has just one model and only 12 customers, but success seems likely, and it is. It's been going on and on and on. You see, if IBM has a monopoly, why do they come out with new products? Why do they come out with new products? That isn't the way a monopolist behaves. You want to know how a monopolist behaves? Look at the post office. Their idea of a new product is to close on Saturday. Yeah. Well, as George Stigler in a famous debate against Galbraith said, no one, to the best of my knowledge, comes into this world crying and screaming and yelling for a copy of John Kenneth Galbraith's book, The New Industrial State. He's got to be persuaded. You see, nobody comes into this world saying, I want Colgate's toothpaste, or I want to be a Baptist, or I want to marry Ben Rogge, or what have you. They've got to be persuaded. And that is the meaning of a free society, is where persuasion rather than coercion is used. And this persuasion, rather than being the mark, you see, of control, is the evidence that control isn't there. Because they're all trying to persuade us in 1,000 different directions. And that's what freedom is all about. That's what freedom, as I see it, that's what freedom is all about. Well, you can say, but aren't these firms going to get together and be able to keep new entrants from coming into the market? Well, do people try that? Of course, as Adam Smith put it, people of the same trade rarely meet together even for merriment and diversion, but that it end in some conspiracy to raise prices. But on the next page he said, but such conspiracies will last for only so long as all parties to the arrangement are of the same mind. Now, what does that mean? Well, suppose, for example, that Sennholz and Anderson and I were to form an agreement that we would do no more lecturing for Leonard Reed for less than $1,000 a lecture. You see, I don't see anything wrong with that, by the way. We're just asking for what we know, what we're worth. But there might be one consequence of that, and that is some shrinkage in quantity demanded, say to 0. And I know what would happen. You see, Sennholz would go around to Reed and he would say, our fee is $1,000, but if you'll hire me, I'll make a gift of $200 to fee. And Anderson would make it $300, and I'd have to make it $400, And there we'd go, and pretty soon, back and forth, and pretty soon we'd be down to the market price. $25 and all the water you can drink during the lecture. Except Sennholz would get 30 because of that damned accent of his. Yes, what is the price? See, far-fetched? Not at all. Not at all. I don't know of a single cartel that has been able to make it without the help of government. See, if Anderson and Sennholz and I can get laws passed saying no one is permitted you see, that the American public must be protected from unauthorized speakers on economic topics who could lead this nation into inflation or depression or into great crisis. And we must have purity here, and only those who have been trained in purity and who have PhDs in economics are now permitted to lecture. We'd get those amateurs like Leonard Reed off the street, you see. If we can get government on our side, and you see government has been brought in many cases by cartel members to help protect them from new entry. Many business groups are able to use government to prevent entry. In trucking, for example, in banking in many, many states of this country, in medicine in a variety of ways, as a matter of fact. But not just businessmen. The American Farm Program was a giant cartel run by government. That's all it was. It is a giant cartel run by the government to hold up the price above the market price at the expense, you see, by the way, particularly of the low-income urban family that spends a good share of its income on food, fiber, and alcohol, and those are farm-derived products. Trade unionism is a kind of cartel that receives the special support of government, or at least special privileges, including in many cases the right to use violence. The postal people right here in New York right now are out there blocking the streets to make certain that deliveries can't be made. Now you see, suppose that were being done by a rival business firm. Good God, the uproar could be heard all over the world. But if it's done by trade unionists, you see, or dairy farmers, or what have you, or even school teachers, you know, I like to be relevant. Here's one of my favorite cases of violence in a strike in recent years in Indiana. This was up in Gary, Indiana, where the teachers went on strike. But some of the teachers continued to cross the picket line, and one night outside the home of one of those scabs, they found 3 people with firebombs in hand getting ready to firebomb the home of this man who was crossing the picket line. What I liked was the leader of the firebombers. It was a man who teaches civics and safety in Emerson High School. You see? What I'm saying then is, and what Schumpeter is saying. Schumpeter says that he says that that it is perfectly clear that positions in the marketplace could not, of any significant power, could not last for long enough or be used with any sufficient strength for any length of time unless buttressed by government. In other words, his conclusion and mine is that all that government need do for competition to prevail is to get out of its way, not prevent it from happening. Now, as a matter of fact, it has done exactly that, and in this marketplace right here. By the new, well, for some time, but in particular under the new provisions from 1962 on, in the drug amendment, an amendment to our the Drug Act here in this country, from that time on, it has been far more difficult to get new drugs on the market in America. This is an area of great interest of mine. There's been a lot of research done on it. If any of you are interested, you see, let me make a point here. You can say, now why did they put in the 62 amendment? Because this came hard upon the thalidomide disaster in Europe, where these children were born deformed from their mothers during pregnancy, having used this tranquilizer. Now, you can say, now, Rogge, for God's sakes, do you mean you like to see children born deformed? Of course not. Of course not, but that isn't the question. You see, I could just as easily ask, do you like to see people die of tuberculosis? Because had the laws that prevailed in 62 prevailed before that, just a short time, it would have held up for another 5 to 7 years the introduction of the kinds of medication that eventually basically made tuberculosis, eliminated tuberculosis as a major threat to life in America. Now, where does this kind of thing come from? Quite a number of sources of groups now are engaging in research on this. You see, when you hold a drug off the market on the chance it might cause harm, you see, there can be 2 consequences of that. One, it could indeed have caused harm. On the other hand, it could have been saving lives. And you may be forcing people to use a far less safe medication. You see, continue to use it when the other medication is available on the market. Well, what are the implications of the Schumpeter-Rogge hypothesis? Let her rip. Turn the markets free. Get the government out. The markets have a built-in protective device, and that built-in protective device arises out of this creative process that takes place when people are free. Now, would that mean no antitrust laws? That's right. You see, the antitrust law says to a firm, if you are successful at doing peacefully and legally what you were set up to do, if you get to be too successful at that, you come in violation of the law. Yasha Heifetz can get too good. Huh? The Yankees can get too good. The Chicago Cubs could get too good. That's ridiculous. You see, if somebody is growing and making a lot of money just out of being so effective at voluntary exchange with other people, how can that be wrong? How can that be wrong? Well, more than that, you see, when you have a law which says that starlings are to be shot and martins are to be protected, but nobody knows the difference between the two, then you get a lot of crazy things happening. For example, my favorite antitrust case is this one, and I've heard from Gary North that it just made it up to the Supreme Court. literally is still with us. Find baseball picture cards monopolized, tied with bubble gum and marbles. In the estimate of the Federal Trade Commission examiner Herman Tocker, Topps Chewing Gum Incorporated of New York City, the world's largest manufacturer of bubble gum, is monopolizing the baseball picture card industry. Tocker said that Topps has been hustling around, collecting the rights to use the players' pictures, pretty well cornering the major league players. Players get $5 for a 5-year contract. Well, now, who could compete with a firm that's willing to throw money around like that? That's enough. Let's stop and talk a while.
The Foundation for Economic Education, through its many program activities, is dedicated to individual freedom of choice, private property, and the free market economy, which makes it possible. Thousands of people all over the country support our efforts. We sincerely hope that you will join forces with these many freedom devotees and let us send you a sampling of our materials. Simply write to us, and we'll send you our monthly journal, The Freeman, along with descriptive material about our activities. Please write to Foundation for Economic Education, 30 South Broadway, Irvington, New York, 105.